There was a conversation I recently had that had me look at perception differently. What's funny is nothing dramatic happened in that conversation. No one yelled at me, no one told me no. The conversation was fine, actually. But there was this one moment that I said something that mattered to me, and the other person paused just for a second, looked down and said, "Let me think about that." That was it. But somehow those 2 seconds followed me out of the room. You know how you can be walking away from a conversation and still be having it in your head? That was me. At first, I was just replaying the pause. And then I started giving the pause a reason. Maybe they didn't like what I said. Maybe they didn't like what was coming out of me. Maybe they didn't believe that I knew everything. And before anyone had given me an answer, I was already responding to one. That stopped me because I realized the conversation that happened in the room and the conversation I was having in my head were not the same conversation. One was made out of what actually happened, and the other was made out of what I thought it meant. And internally, they felt like exactly the same thing. That's where the lens came in for me. You can look through the same piece of glass for so long that you forget that there's glass between you and what you're looking at. And if the glass has a tint, eventually you don't think the lens is blue, you think the world is blue. I feel like we do that with meaning. We interpret something so quickly that we don't notice the interpretation is something that we added. And after a while, we're not saying, "This is what I think is happening." We're saying, "This is what's happening." And that's a big difference. The longer I sat down with that conversation, the stranger it became because the pause started getting bigger. There were other things that happened in that room, good things, parts of the conversation that were open, things that gave me no reason to believe anything was wrong. But those weren't the parts that I kept replaying. I kept going back to those 2 seconds, the pause, the face, the tone. And every time I replayed it, I was adding the meaning back into my memory. At some point, I wasn't even remembering the room anymore. I was remembering my interpretation of what happened. And that realization stayed with me. Because 20 things can happen in one conversation. But if the one thing fits the story we're already beginning to tell ourselves, somehow that becomes a thing that we carry with us. Somebody can tell you 5 things they appreciate about you and what you're doing and how it's great. But one thing that they think needs work, and guess which one climbs into bed with you that night while you tucking yourself in? We do this. Why? I'm not saying there's anything wrong for us for doing this. We're trying to understand life. Something happens, and naturally we want to know what it means. Our minds are meaning making machines. The problem is how quickly a possibility can become a conclusion. Their thinking about it became, they have doubts about me. And if I believe the second sentence strongly enough, now I'm going to behave differently the next time I see them. Maybe I hesitate before following up. Maybe next time I don't say as much. Maybe I start shrinking with an idea before anyone asks me to. Now I'm not only interpreting the experience, I'm moving according to the interpretation. And that's when I saw the loop. It wasn't some mysterious experience or karma dragging me back to the same place. I was participating in it. I would do this by making choices based off of what meanings that I made up inside of my head. And then I will look at the results of those choices as proof that the meaning that I made up had been right all along. Like, see, I knew it. This was going to happen. I was right all along. Of course, I'm the one that caused it and created it. The loop doesn't have to make anything new up. It keeps you cycling in your old experience, what you created. It only has to convince you that its version is the whole view. That's how we get stuck in the lens. I think that what surprised me is how badly I wanted the story to finish. Not knowing what the pause meant left the whole thing open. Maybe it meant something. Maybe it didn't. Maybe the answer was going to be yes. Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know. And I don't know can feel like a very exposed place to stay in. We say we want possibilities, but do we? Possibilities mean more than one ending is still alive. There's infinite options. Sometimes even a disappointing conclusion gives us relief because at least that feeling of uncertainty is over. We know that we were rejected. So we know how to move once we know for a fact that we're going to be disappointed. Or at least we think we know how to move. And so that changed the way that I really started hearing myself. I often would hear how one experience could become a statement about our life. Something doesn't work out, and then somewhere along the way, it becomes, oh man, things don't like this work out for me. That's no longer a description of one situation that happened. That's a philosophy over my life. And once you have a philosophy, you carry it into the next room, into the next experience. And that's the part that I had never really considered. Every day after we arise from our slumber, we get a new 24 hours. It's a new day, but we don't always meet a new day from the perspective of it being new. Even if we're knowing a new person, we don't come into that situation empty handed. Sometimes we arrive with a definition already prepared for. So I stopped immediately trying to replace a difficult interpretation with a positive affirmation or a nicer one, or creating some meaning. I don't need to tell myself, oh, no, no, everything is going to work out perfectly. Because that's me still trying to control and interpret the situation. Because in all honesty, I don't know if it's going to work out or not. So why would I still try to control and tell the story? So what is much more grounding and allowing the universe to work is just saying, I don't know yet. That's it. I don't know yet. And for me, that little word, yet, just left enough room for reality to participate without creating some interpretation or meaning behind it. So, of course, later, I found myself in another life situation, different circumstances, different people, but it was the same urge that I had to immediately decide what something meant. But this time, I noticed it a lot sooner. And it wasn't like some epiphany or a divine download in that moment. I just caught myself filling in information that I didn't actually have from the situation. So I stopped. I didn't call it good, bad, whatever I was trying to create. I didn't decide whether it was going to work out. I just let it stay unfinished and open. And then life did what life does. More information came. Some of what I would have assumed wouldn't have even been true. A few things were much simpler than the story that I would have built around it. Other things came a little more clear without having to force the clarity. And that's when something really clicked for me. I hadn't become better at predicting or controlling my life. I had become more willing to let the magic of life reveal itself. That was the change. I don't have to translate every silence, name every pause, and turn every shift into some sort of sign. Sometimes a pause is just Sometimes a pause is just where the next part of the conversation hasn't happened yet. And when I stopped naming things so quickly, I noticed something else. New experience had a chance to actually feel new. Because when I name something before it has time to become itself, I'm not really experiencing what's happening anymore. I'm experiencing my definition of what's happening. And that's not the same thing as allowing the magic to happen. I think of that first conversation differently now. Those 2 seconds were hella real. The pause was real, the words were real. But the story that I carried out of that room, I made part of that. And I think that's where the idea has really stayed with me. There were times in my life where I thought, all right, man, here we go again. Same story, same ending, different room, same person, different body. But now I hear that a little differently. Because sometimes the room was different. People were different. The circumstances were changed. What felt familiar was the meaning that I was about to give it. The road is not always repeating the same experience. The meaning is. And once I saw that, I didn't have to force myself to see the world differently. I just needed to give the room enough space to actually see what was there and take a step back. That's different. I can let a moment breathe before I give it meaning. I can let someone finish what they're trying to show me and allow it to unfold without trying to make proof of what I already think it's going to be. Because sometimes reality is still speaking, and we done already cut it off mid sentence. We already called it a failure, a rejection, a sign, or the end. And life is standing there like, I wasn't finished. I love that because maybe that's what awareness gives us. Not the ability to know exactly what everything means, but just enough space to recognize when we're the ones supplying the meaning and when creation is giving you the meaning. So these days, I don't immediately assume that I'm always standing in the same experience. Sometimes I am, but sometimes I'm looking at the view through an old prescription. And that's what I want to remember. Sometimes the loop isn't always in the view. Sometimes the loop is in the lens. And when you notice, you can see when the view has actually changed. And always remember, You are the light, the awareness. Just be it. Shine.